Chapter 2 A Moment of Truth. The spirit is always ready to reveal itself, and although the beauty of nature may often act as a trigger, there are really no particular circumstances in which an experience of elevated consciousness can surprise the heart. Browsing through many accounts of such experiences, it seems that it is often when the mind is temporarily free from preoccupation with the activities of life that one can suddenly find oneself in another dimension, so to speak. It may be while traveling, or alone in nature, or between projects, or simply when relaxing in the bath or shower. Such moments permit the ever-present spirit to break free, to rejoice, and to make its presence felt. God is in all things, and though a strong inducement, the presence of the beauty of nature is not an essential prerequisite. In Watcher on the Hills, a person identified as M.W. is quoted, "I was waiting for the train in a small waiting room of the railway station. About 15 or 20 other people were gathered there for the same purpose, all total strangers to me. Some were sitting reading newspapers or talking, and others stood huddling about a stove in the corner of the room. There was the usual subdued chatter of voices with occasional laughter. It was a familiar, rather a commonplace scene. Suddenly, I was aware of some mysterious current of force, subtle, yet of unimagined potency, which seemed to sweep through that small, drab waiting room. A kind of glory descended upon the gathered company, or so it seemed to me. I looked at the faces of those around me, and they seemed to be suffused with an inner radiance. I experienced in that moment a sense of profoundest kinship with each and every person there. I loved them all, but with a kind of love I had never felt before. It was an all-embracing emotion which bound us together indissolubly in a deep unity of being. I lost all sense of personal identity then. These people were no longer strangers to me. I knew them all. We were no longer separate individuals, each enclosed in his own private world, divided by all the barriers of social conventions and personal exclusiveness. We were one with each other and with the life which we all lived in common. I think in this moment I understood for the first time the meaning of those words, the mystic brotherhood. M.W. in Watcher on the Hills. Among this small group of travelers, a glimpse of the real was revealed to only one of them. Though we may feel that the world is the same for all, yet our perceptions are entirely individual, and the subjective effect of any situation is even more personal. So when it comes to mystical experience, a person's companions may be entirely unaware that a scene which they are all perceiving is having such a profound effect upon one of them. Though not in itself a spiritual experience, the same thought occurred to the explorer, mystically minded writer, and military man, Sir Francis Younghusband, 1863 to 1942, when he was trekking in Kashmir. At length we halted for refreshment and rest, still on the summit of the ridge, with the most beautiful valley on earth spread out in all its loveliness 3,000 feet below, and the heavenly snowy range bounding the horizon from end to end before us. Just faintly, the sounds from some village below would be wafted to us through the clear, still air. But otherwise we seemed serenely apart from the noisy turmoil of humanity, and bathed in the warm noonday sunlight, I was able to drink in all the spirit of the loveliness around me. And there came upon me this thought, which doubtless has occurred to many another besides myself, why the scene should so influence me and yet make no impression on the men about me. Here were men with far keener eyesight than my own, and around me were animals with eyesight keener still. Clearly, it is not the eye, but the soul that sees. But then comes the still further reflection. What may there not be staring me straight in the face, which I am as blind to as the Kashmir stags are to the beauties amidst which they spend their entire lives? The whole panorama may be vibrating with beauties man has not yet the soul to see. Some already living, no doubt, see beauties that we ordinary men cannot appreciate. Sir Francis Younghusband, Kashmir. To artists, writers, and musicians, experiences of the divine beauty can be the lifeblood of their creativity. Rabindranath Tagore, 1861 to 1941, writer, painter, translator, poet, and composer of many songs, describes how his poem, The Fountain Awakened from Its Dream, arose from an unexpected unveiling of an everyday scene that took place while he was relaxing on his veranda in Calcutta. Where the Southern Street ends, trees in the garden of Free School Street are visible. One morning, I was standing on the veranda, looking at them. The sun was slowly rising above the screen of their leaves, and as I was watching it, suddenly, in a moment, a veil seemed to be lifted from my eyes. I found the world wrapped in an inexpressible glory, with its waves of joy and beauty bursting and breaking on all sides. The thick shroud of sorrow that lay on my heart in many folds was pierced through and through by the light of the world, which was everywhere radiant. That very day the poem known as The Fountain Awakened from Its Dream flowed on like a fountain itself. When it was finished, still the curtain did not fall on that strange vision of beauty and joy. There was nothing and no one whom I did not love at that moment. I stood on the veranda and watched the coolies as they tramped down the road. Their movements, their forms, their countenances seemed to be strangely wonderful to me, as if they were all moving like waves in the great ocean of the world. When one young man placed his hand upon the shoulder of another and passed laughingly by, it was a remarkable event to me. I seemed to witness, in the wholeness of my vision, the movements of the body of all humanity, and to feel the beat of the music and the rhythm of a mystic dance. For some days I was in this ecstatic mood. Rabindranath Tagore, Letters to a Friend. While Tagore saw mundane life as a mystic dance, full of beauty and joy, providing inspiration for his poetry, the Swiss painter and musician Paul Klee, 1879 to 1940, recounts a moment of revelation into the beauty of nature, which he regards as God's workshop. The experience has a permanent influence on the way he sets about the creation of a painting. He wrote, "At one time I had been working exclusively at home for weeks, when suddenly I discovered, one day on a walk near Bern, how really extraordinarily beautiful nature is. I tried to hold on to this feeling. To this day I always make studies out of doors without direct sketching. The eye itself makes the sketch, and there are places that influence me profoundly. When the demand arises, lead your pupils to nature, into nature. Let them experience how a bud forms, how a tree grows, how a butterfly opens its wings, so that they may become as rich, as mobile, as willful as nature. Contemplation is revelation. Contemplation is insight into God's workshop. There, in the lap of nature, lies the secret of creation." While Tagore and Klee were experiencing something of the divine in the outer world, some spontaneous visions of the higher reality are entirely inward. Francis Ridley Havergal, 1836 to 1879, religious poet, musician, and writer of hymns, describes a kind of vision of which she has clearly had some prior experience, in which she both hears and sees a wonderful, entrancing music, far beyond the range of human sight and hearing. In the train, I had one of those curious musical visions, which only very rarely visit me. I hear strange and very beautiful chords, generally full, slow, and grand, succeeding each other in most interesting sequences. I do not invent them. I could not. They pass before my mind, and I only listen. Now and then my will seems aroused when I see ahead how some fine resolution might follow, and I seem to will that certain chords should come, and then they do come. But then my will seems suspended again, and they go on quite independently. It is so interesting. The chords seem to fold over each other and die away down into music of infinite softness, and then they unfold and open out as if great curtains were being withdrawn, one after another, widening the view till, with a gathering power and intensity and fullness, it seems as if the very skies were being opened out before one, and a sort of great blaze and glory of music, such as my outward ears never heard, gradually swells out in perfectly sublime splendor. This time there was an added feature. I seemed to hear depths and heights of sound beyond the scale which human ears can receive, keen, far-up octaves, like vividly twinkling starlight of music, and mighty, slow vibrations of gigantic strings going down into grand thunders of depths, octaves below anything otherwise appreciable as musical notes. Then, all at once, it seemed as if my soul had got a new sense, and I could see this inner music as well as hear it, and then it was like gazing down into marvelous abysses of sound, and up into dazzling regions of what, to the eye, would have been light and color, but to this new sense was sound. Wasn't it odd? It lasted perhaps half an hour, but I don't know exactly, and it is very difficult to describe in words. Frances Ridley Havergal, Memorials. Although glimpses of the divine may be experienced in the course of everyday life, that is only the beginning of the spiritual journey, for it is possible to go altogether beyond the material world. Sometimes such states of consciousness may be experienced at the time of death, as the mind and soul withdraw from the body prior to entering whatever after-death state awaits that particular soul. Over the centuries and millennia, many such experiences have been described, this one from the Jewish tradition. The day before he died, Rabbi Schneur Zalomon asked his grandson, "Do you see the ceiling?" When the boy remained silent, the rabbi continued, in a voice quivering with joy, "I can see no ceiling or walls. I can only see the life of everything, and God creating everything, and making everything live." Hasidic tradition in Leaders of Hasidism. A similar experience is recorded of Jakob Böhme, 1575 to 1624, German shoemaker, original thinker, and mystic within the Christian tradition, who believed in a universal God, who is a unity and the primordial power of good in the universe, self-existent, independent of forms, needing no locality for its existence, unmeasurable, and not subject to the intellectual comprehension of any being. Franz Hartmann, in Life and Doctrines of Jakob Böhme, writes, on the 20th of November, 1624, before 1 a.m., Böhme called his son Tobias to his bedside and asked him whether he could hear the beautiful music. He then requested him to open the door of the room so that the celestial songs could be better heard. Later on, he asked what time it was, and when he was told that the clock had struck 2, he said, "It is not yet time for me. My time will be in 3 hours." Taking leave from his sons, he said, "Now I shall enter paradise." He then asked his eldest son, whose loving look seemed to keep Bum's soul from severing the bonds of the body, to turn around, and, giving one deep sigh, his soul gave up the body to the earth to which it belonged, and entered into that higher state which is known to none, except those who have experienced it themselves. Even more compelling is an account from a Western disciple writing to her guru, concerning personal experience of inner worlds or realms of consciousness, during which she witnesses the unearthly light of these heavenly regions, and hears the celestial music of the divine word. In this instance, the soul leaves the body and returns again during the course of spiritual practice. I think I had told you that I had penetrated the astral regions and had met your radiant form. From there, after going through many beautiful places, I found the bell sound deepening into vast peals of bells, and my vision growing clearer and brighter. I beheld such a brilliance as I could never have thought possible with this earthly mind. The inhabitants were luminous and bright, and the dwellings of a design and grace that this earth will never know. From there, I went into the region of sunrise, and the sound deepened into a very deep, resounding vibration. It required much concentration to pass through this stage. Letter from Simla, November 12, 1944, in With the Three Masters, Volume 2. Understandably, journeys into the inner realms, or heavens that lie beyond the gates of death, are less common than revelations of the divine in the scenery and happenings of this world. Even so, research published in recent years into near-death experiences, especially in books written by accredited neurologists and doctors, has revealed that they are far more common than had previously been imagined. Such glimpses of reality are often a source of deep understanding, illuminating the mundane world and conveying an unexpected insight into the nature of how things function, an impression that may last long after the experience has passed. In Recorded Illuminates, an anonymous source is quoted, "I was dazed, but at the same time thrilled with the ecstasy of it. It was a joy unspeakable and full of glory. I seemed to be walking on air. The whole world was changed. Everything was brighter than it had been before, even on that bright morning, and was alive with a deep, calm, radiant, and joyful life. I was filled with happiness and peace, and knew intuitively that I had found the reality for which I had sought. I was amazed, too, at my understanding of things. It seemed as if my mind had but to present a matter to my consciousness for it to be understood fully and completely." After I had diarized my rough notes of the experience, I worked at a lecture which I was due to deliver that evening. I was amazed at the wider understanding that had so strangely come to me, but I did not realize until quite long afterwards how completely my outlook on life, and in fact my whole scheme of things, had been changed. Nor did I foresee that I would speak for years afterwards on the understanding that came to me in that brief hour's meditation. Many others have spoken of the lasting understanding left in the wake of such moments of illumination. In 1600, at the age of 25, Jakob Böhme was overtaken by an unexpected experience. Hans Martensen, in Jakob Böhmen, writes, "Sitting one day in his room, his eyes fell upon a burnished pewter dish, which reflected the sunshine with such marvelous splendor that he fell into an inward ecstasy, and it seemed to him as if he could now look into the principles and deepest foundation of things. He believed that it was only a fancy, and in order to banish it from his mind, he went out upon the green. But here he remarked that he gazed into the very heart of things, the very herbs and grass, and that actual nature harmonized with what he had inwardly seen. He said nothing of this to anyone, but praised and thanked God in silence. He continued in the honest practice of his craft, was attentive to his domestic affairs, and was on terms of goodwill with all men. 10 years later, he again had another remarkable inward experience. He suddenly discovered that what he had previously seen only chaotically, fragmentarily, and in isolated glimpses, he now beheld as a coherent whole and in more definite outlines. The adventurer, writer, doctor, and psychiatrist Richard Maurice Buck, 1837 to 1902, best known for his book Cosmic Consciousness, a study in the evolution of the human mind, written over many years and published in 1901, had a similar experience which he described as the most significant of his life. Buck, the son of an English parish curate, was a friend of the poet and philosopher Edward Carpenter, 1844 to 1929, who had traveled in India, was a close friend of Rabindranath Tagore, and from whom Buck borrowed the term cosmic consciousness. In this passage, Brahmic refers to Brahman, the Indian Vedic and Upanishadic term for the supreme, transcendent reality, traditionally characterized by the three unified attributes of truth, consciousness, and bliss. Writing of himself, Buck relates, "It was in the early spring, at the beginning of his 36th year, that he and two friends passed the evening reading uplifting poetry. They parted at midnight, and he had a long drive in the handsome, horse-drawn cab. His mind, deeply under the influence of the ideas, images, and emotions called up by the reading and talk of the evening, was calm and peaceful. He was in a state of quiet, almost passive enjoyment. All at once, without warning of any kind, he found himself wrapped around, as it were, by a flame-colored cloud. For an instant he thought of fire, some sudden conflagration in the great city. The next, he knew that the light was within himself. Directly afterwards came upon him a sense of exultation, of immense joyousness, accompanied or immediately followed by an intellectual illumination quite impossible to describe. Into his brain streamed one momentary lightning flash of the Brahmic, transcendental, splendor which has ever since lightened his life. Upon his heart fell one drop of Brahmic bliss, leaving thenceforward for always an aftertaste of heaven." Among other things, he did not come only to believe, but he saw and knew that the cosmos is not dead matter, but a living presence, that the soul of man is immortal, that the universe is so built and ordered that without any peradventure all things work together for the good of each and all, that the foundation principle of the world is what we call love. He claims that he learned more within the few seconds during which the illumination lasted than in previous months or even years of study, and that he learned much that no study could ever have taught. The illumination itself continued not more than a few moments, but its effects proved ineffaceable. It was impossible for him ever to forget what he at that time saw and knew. Neither did he, or could he, ever doubt the truth of what was then presented to his mind. Richard Maurice Buck, Cosmic Consciousness. As in Buck's case, a predisposition to such experiences can be induced by much thinking on the subject. Giving attention, consciously or unconsciously, to the spirit can cause it to reveal itself, can encourage something of one's true inner nature to come to the fore. In Watcher on the Hills, an anonymous source is quoted, "I was reading the words telling of the ever-present and all-pervading quality of Brahman, when suddenly my whole being was seized by an acute state of awareness, and immediately the words assumed a great significance. I knew somehow that they were true, that Brahman, at that time I suppose I translated it as God, was all about me, and through me, and in me. The knowledge did not come from without. Unmistakably, it came from within. The state was one of extraordinary joy. I realized happiness was within me. I believe I also felt that I controlled great power, so that I could have stopped the train just by willing it. But in writing of this afterwards as I do, I cannot be certain of this. I can remember looking out at the countryside passing by, and everything, the trees, meadows, and hedges, were all part of me, and I of them, and all were in a great unity through which was God. Everything was a whole. The experience lasted a few minutes, and very gradually it ebbed away. But I knew with completely unshakable conviction that I had been in touch with reality in those few minutes. Just as mystical experience is usually accompanied by profound insight, a sense of the divine can often induce a yearning for deeper understanding. The English clergyman, Charles Kingsley, 1819 to 1875, scholar, author, and social reformer, expresses this longing. Everything seems to be full of God's reflex, if we could but see it. Oh, how I have prayed to have the mystery unfolded, at least hereafter, to see, if but for a moment, the whole harmony of the great system. Charles Kingsley, Letters. It seems clear that although these kinds of experiences can arise unexpectedly, they may also be highlights of a more constant spiritual understanding. Yet in all cases, they are of profound significance to those concerned, something characteristic of mystical experience. Even so, one of the most wonderful things to bear in mind is that they are, in many cases, only the hem of his garment, as Joseph James succinctly puts it. Such spiritual perception may be an experience of only the lower rungs of the ladder or dimension of being. Yet, what illumination it bestows upon the recipient regarding the nature of existence! A veil seemed to lift from my eyes. I was amazed at my understanding of things. My whole being was seized by an acute state of awareness. The refrain is repeated again and again. For a brief period, the divine immanence becomes almost tangible. These life-changing experiences happen to ordinary folk, young or old, in the course of their everyday lives, but they last only for a short time. Wonderful as they are not yet lasting and continuous experiences of the highest reality, beyond space and time. Most of the accounts seem to be of preliminary experiences on the threshold of the inner realms. They are experiences of expanded consciousness in which the soul remains within the confines of the body and the material world. The soul is rarely described as leaving the body, becoming utterly unconscious of the physical universe, as it would were it to rise up and enter the heavenly worlds. Joy and bliss automatically arise from inner mental concentration. Even in the early stages of spiritual evolution, overwhelming experiences of inner bliss, beauty, love, and understanding will normally be only occasional visitors. Yet the journey has hardly begun. The higher spiritual realms have yet to be traversed. These regions are described by mystics as being intensely beautiful by comparison to the physical domain. As the Indian mystic Kabir says, their light alone is millions of times the light of the sun and the moon. The souls in those blissful places are said to be in a state of permanent beatitude and joy, working in conscious harmony with the divine purpose, aware that they are spiritual beings dwelling in the presence of the divine. In all this vast creation, it is only in the world of matter that, for many people, darkness, unhappiness, and deep spiritual ignorance prevail. In the higher realms, souls are instinctively aware of the all-pervading presence of the divine. They know that they are swimming in it like fish in water, flying in it like birds in the air. It is understandable, then, that human beings are overjoyed by any experience, however fleeting, that reveals the existence of a higher reality. Yet such experiences may be only starting points, intimations of the soul's essential immortality, echoes of the waves breaking upon the shores of the great immensity. But is it possible for the fleeting to become more permanent? Can we, while living here in exile, enjoy a more continuous awareness of the divine?